Why is our culture so obsessed with superheroes? These films are always the biggest box office hits. Our streaming services can't seem to release enough new series fast enough. Is it just our love for these action movies, or could there be something deeper going on connected to the story written on our souls? Screenwriter and author Brian Godawa joins me in this episode to look at this question and more. This is Tatooine Sons.
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody listen to this.
Welcome to Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name an official Star Wars creature and be endorsed by the writer-director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation, that there is a story, it is written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why I am honored to be joined this week by Brian Godawa. Brian is an award-winning Hollywood screenwriter known for films like To End All Wars, starring Kiefer Sutherland, and the film adaptation of Frank Peretti's The Visitation. Brian is also a controversial movie and culture blogger, an internationally known teacher on faith, worldviews, and storytelling, and the author of Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment. And also the fascinating Chronicles of the Nephilim series. His obsession with God, movies, and worldviews results in theological storytelling that blows your mind while inspiring your soul. And one thing is absolutely for certain when it comes to Brian, he's going to share perspectives you aren't going to hear anywhere else. And I asked Brian why we're all so obsessed with superheroes.
Oh, let me tell you. Well, I think that the essence of superheroes is deity. And I think that I'm convinced that humanity is created, as St. Augustine said, with a God-shaped vacuum. I think it was him. Or was it Aquinas? One of the two. And point being that, we're creating God's image, actually. And so having God's image in us has that, inherent longing and need for our creator. And superheroes perform a function of pointing us towards that transcendent amplification, in a sense, of humanity. And of course, as a Christian, I think that it is a category that can be easily and often twisted, actually, to become idols. And that's, in fact, what I think is going on in our modern American secular culture today. Is as much as I love comic books when I was a kid and all that too. And I love comic books and I love superheroes and stuff. But I think that unfortunately we're in an era where that sort of paradigm has replaced God, whereas it used to be sort of, I think in an older sense, like the original Superman, it pointed to God, actually. I mean, Superman was, created by some Jewish guys, but they drew from the biblical concept and they drew from the messianic. And I think that inherent need for messianic deliverance is ultimately what it's all about. But what you get is, of course, if you've got a world that is godless, they're going to create a substitute for the living God. They're going to create what Francis Schaeffer said was really more the amplified humanity rather than sort of than a reflection of a transcendent deity, creator, if that makes any sense. So, the gods, the gods of the pagan gods, from Greece, really ancient Near East, a lot of these gods that I study, they are like humans, they quarrel, they bicker, they have sex, all these things because they are literally the projection of our humanity. And I think that in that sense, but the realm, superheroes are dealing in that messianic and deity realm. And so consequently, you have a lot of, we'll get into the hero's journey later, but that's kind of what I think is going on. And so where we're at now for me personally, I know, you're a podcast, you guys love superheroes and all that. So, I have a mixed bag of feelings about it. Like I say, I have an inherent love. I watch a lot of the superhero stuff. I'm watching less and less these days because of the politicization of Hollywood, but that's another issue. But I'm still, I still understand, I still enjoy the messianic nature of these stories, but I definitely do see the paganization of what's going on, not just the literal, like whether it's Thor, which was a good the first Thor movie was really, interesting movie and such, interesting story, right? Not just deliberate, obvious paganization, although there's a lot of that going on. But I think just the nature of it has become, like I say, this God substitute where that's where people are getting their notions from of, and it's a humanistic deification, if that makes any sense, Mm-hmm. So, like I say, I go back to the old school, you look at the old school versions of like Superman and such, and they pointed to something more transcendent, something higher than ourselves. Mm-hmm. And even the, it's interesting. However, I do think that the messianic nature of superheroes is an inherently Christian concept, meaning our God Yahweh created the universe, and he embeds within it reality such that we kind of have a sense, we do know, the book of Romans talks about in our hearts and souls, we know there's a creator God who created all these things. We even have a sense of what he's like, but our sinful nature suppresses the truth and unrighteousness. And so I think that even false messiahs in some of these superhero stories, or like the Matrix, right? They used Christ imagery and the Christ motif, because it's a universal theme, to actually embed antichrist notions of salvation. And they did that deliberately. They said so. They were, they created the Wachowski brothers were Nietzschean. They are Nietzschean. And they even said that's what they were doing. So I'm not making this up as some kind of, vast right-wing conspiracy, right? But even in spite of that, I think that it reflects that inner longing for the true Christ that we do have, right? So I just think that, where's the line here? I just think that we need to be more aware, because I still, as a Christian, interacting with other Christians, I remember, Matrix is old now, but it's coming back. But I remember that was a good example of like powerful Christ imagery. And so Christians were glomming onto that, but it's like, but you have to understand, it's not Christian salvation that they're promoting. It's actually self-deification, right? And so I feel that Christians need to be aware of that, because they could be easily manipulated and drawn away in the name of this sort of shallow notion of messianism. However, if we inform ourselves and educate ourselves on understanding the nature of this stuff, I think that there's a certain amount of wisdom and education, protection, I guess, that will allow us to be able to discern the good from the bad. And, at some point we reject some things, but I guess what I'm saying is we can learn to appreciate the good and reject the bad. For example, Matrix was always my favorite example because it, when he wakes up in the pod and pulls the thing out of his mouth, that connected with me, resonated so deeply because that is exactly what I experienced when I became a Christian. And I woke up and I realized everyone around me is a slave, and I was a slave too. And so there are some profound truths that even an Antichrist Messiah can communicate, but we do have to be cognizant of these things and interactive and aware of them, because if we're just soaking them in without thought or just appreciate, or this, well, it's Christ, it's a Christ story. Oh, it's a Christ story, so it's okay. I think that becomes detrimental on our spiritual development and psyche. If that's my rambling on that.
Yeah, that's good. You brought up Superman and sort of the longer term version of Superman up until some of the recent stuff that's come out, which was really very messianic in presentation. But in your book, Hollywood Worldviews, you talk a little bit about Batman as well and sort of the differences there. And throughout, DC Comics and even in the recent films, there's been this Superman versus Batman type thing. What is that battle? What is this idea that we're drawn to the two characters being at war with each other? What does that tell us about ourselves? Yeah, well, first of all, I just have to warn you that even though I enjoy these things, I am not going to be as versed or, as you on referring to all these things. Sure. But I think, because I've always been a Batman fan, so even when I was a young kid, So I think, again, I come at things from a broader philosophical perspective, and I see that as the man versus God. I mean, that's man's struggle with his God and with deity. Now, if I remember, I don't remember which was the Superman one, but it was a few back before that battle came out. I just remember they were still using the godlike imagery, but in a way that you could sort of say, they're trying to reflect Christ, like he flies above the earth and he hears everyone's prayers. Yeah,
so
Superman Returns, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of religious intent behind that and stuff. Mm-hmm. And like I say, you can't deal with that character and not wrestle with the deity notion. So I'm not against that, even if it comes out humanistic, right? But the Batman versus Superman, I think that's the man's struggle with his creator in a sense. Obviously Superman's not our creator, right, but he represents the deity. Let's put it this way, man's struggle with deity, because we exist in and by the way, there's another reason why, I'll have a negative view about a lot of the philosophy behind, what's going on in the superhero and even the hero journey of today in stories. However, like I say, I think on another level, though, it does reflect that inherent, how God creates us with that inherent need. And so in other words, to have a story that's showing man wrestling with this deity, that reflects our ultimate core essence. In other words, I've heard it been said, man is, what was the phrase? Man is homo spiritualicus or something like that, okay. Meaning we are created as spiritual beings in need of God. So even though I may argue that, it may have a humanistic flair to it, I actually appreciate the fact that that they're dealing with the struggle of man and deity, because to ignore that altogether is the ultimate secular insult. But what's interesting to me is it's also not satisfying storytelling, because we have the need for deity. If you ignore it and try to suppress it, it actually makes for less interesting storytelling, even for unbelieving people, even for people who aren't religious. I think that's why you've got these more transcendent stories are more powerful. A good example of that for me is the movie Troy, which was sort of a reproduction of the fall of Troy and stuff with Achilles and that one of the motifs of that story was precisely to deconstruct the notion of deity and to say that there is no, there's a lot of the gods don't exist and type of stuff. And therefore the only ultimate afterlife is glory, your story having glory, you know? So it was a very humanistic tale, but it was taking an original story that was very religious and pagan, but it made the story unsatisfying. Like I would prefer to watch like Gladiator, which was very pagan, but it had a spiritual sense to it that at least had some ring of truth to it. So like in a world of imperfect, you know, there's nothing perfect out there. I'm not going to agree with everything. It's like, I kind of prefer the attempt of people to promote a pagan notion rather than the secular, atheistic notion, because the atheistic worldview is just, it's unsatisfying in a story sense because it doesn't connect with the need for transcendence in our soul. So what I'm saying here is we have a need for transcendence. And that transcendence is that which is above and beyond us and outside of our world that gives meaning to our world. If there's no transcendent, if there's no existence, reality, God, whatever, you know, if there's no reality that is outside of our physical, whatever known universe that we inhabit, that creates it, that gives meaning to it, then everything's ultimately meaningless and absurd. And that's of course the lesson of the existentialists, you know, of the past, but it still holds true, you know? So that's another rambling, I guess, off of the Batman Superman thing. Yeah. But, you know, I haven't thought much beyond the implications of that other than seeing it on that level, you know? So, but, you know, obviously Batman represents man's ingenuity, and technology, and which again, this is another thing that I think, in a sense that, you know, Batman, the positive element of Batman, which by the way, I think Dark Knight is probably my favorite of all time, superhero movies. But the idea there is that technology helps man transcend himself to a certain degree and to achieve justice, you know, as Batman uses his mind and his technology in order to, you know, vanquish the villain and stuff. And what's interesting is Dark Knight, of course, the opposite of that is chaos, and Joker represented chaos. And he took, you know, what's his name? Nolan took what?
Was it Harvey Dent you're thinking of? Or?
Oh, no. Nolan, Christopher Nolan, the director.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The writer director. He took that. He played that out beautifully, you know, where we hadn't seen that character who's just, well, why do I have to have a reason? I just love chaos because it's chaos versus order, right? So there's a primal, so what I'm saying is even the Batman versus Superman thing, it connects with a primal part of our life and our reality, struggling with that. So the technology thing. So what I like about Batman is the technology actually, again, this is not wittingly, I'm not saying they think of this, but technology can be used for good or evil. Got it. And it obviously is happening right now to us, right? Technology is destroying the world. The people who control technology are destroying everything. But in and of itself, it's not inherently evil. But technology is man harnessing nature, which is inherently chaotic. That is a reflection itself of the biblical worldview. In Genesis 1, the reason why God says, man, you know, I'm giving you nature and creation, and you are to have dominion over it. And the ancient Jewish notion there is that man, nature is chaos, and man is to use his mind to harness nature, bring order to chaos. Like whether it's learning how to do agriculture and, you know, grow crops, you know, that's technology, right? Well, that grows and expands into what we understand as technology. And that's what Batman represents. Batman represents to me that, again, whether they think this or not, he does embody that notion of using technology for the good to battle chaos, right? So I see it on those primal levels, you know, and I can appreciate on those primal levels. You know, it doesn't mean you have to, it doesn't, well, there's certainly also themes that different movies and stories will deal with for sure. But speaking on the most primal philosophical level, which I tend to approach it from, so.
What Brian just said is so important because it really does speak to that story written on our souls. The world around us is always devolving into chaos, and we want that chaos brought into order. Our problem is found in our actual experience. We create these new technologies that we're convinced will make our lives better, when over time they often result in the exact opposite. The smartphone is a wonderful device, but our addiction to that dopamine hit we get every time a tweet or an Insta is loved has created a world that is obsessed with checking their phones and saying more and more salacious things in order to get that next hit. We long for order and for peace in our lives, when for most of us, we just see more and more chaos. My interview with Brian will continue in just a moment, but I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Cufflinks.com. Brian and I have spent a lot of time talking about Superman and Batman on this episode, so I want to make sure you know that there are a ton of items on Cufflinks.com with those characters. Now, if you're not familiar with Cufflinks.com, all you need to know is that they have over 3,000 items, including cufflinks, ties, tie bars, and socks from all of the fandoms that you love, like Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, DC, Lord of the Rings, and more. We love Cufflinks.com. They're family owned. They're run by a couple of brothers who geek out about these superheroes and Star Wars and all of this nerd stuff as much as we do. So if you want to help the show continue to do what we're doing and look great doing it, head on over to Cufflinks.com. Take a look at everything that site has to offer. Be sure to use the code Tatooine15 at checkout to receive 15% off your entire order. There are just so many cool pieces and way more than just Star Wars. But anyway, as I continued my interview with Brian, I asked him about the hero's journey. His answer is probably very different than anything you've ever heard before.
Yeah, so in my book, Hollywood Worldviews, I kind of describe that hero's journey so that people can spot it and see it, but also appreciate it. And the hero's journey is sort of like the most universal tale. I mean, if you think about the oldest, one of the oldest stories we have is Gilgamesh, and that reads like a modern hero's journey, actually. So, which, by the way, I've novelized Gilgamesh within my biblical worldview called Gilgamesh Immortal. So,
fantastic.
I'm going to always plug my product. I'm proud of that one because I actually respected the original material, but I retold the story within the biblical worldview.
Right.
Anyway, what was it? I got off topic.
It's really good, though. I'm serious.
So, this is another expression of. So, I think the hero's journey is basically and I'll run through it, but it's an expression of redemption or of conversion. And what I mean by that is that's why in and of itself, it's an embodiment of a religious worldview. So the basic hero's journey is that, we have a character in a story, which we also call the protagonist now, who we identify with on some level. Well, they may not be exactly like us, but we identify them like they could be a Batman or Superman, right? Which, that's not who we are, but we identify through universal desire or, so they want justice or they want freedom, Braveheart, right? This is one of my all-time favorites. They want something that we can relate to or look for meaning in life. Forrest Gump, they want meaning and purpose, or a lot of times it could just simply be, So we identify with them in that sense. On some universal way. Luke, of course, in the Star Wars, he represents the young, coming of age, young adult who's stuck in a little hometown and wants to go out and see the world. That's more universal than just about anything. It's as universal as the story of the family, right? Mm-hmm. And how many of us can relate to that, right? So he wants to get out, see the world, and he feels like he's been held back, et cetera. So that's sort of how we relate to him. And he's like he's an everyman, right? And I can understand. Luke, he works he's a mechanic, right? So it's like, okay, that's cool. And we relate to him in many different ways. But we can still relate to a king if that king wants what we want, Mm-hmm. So, you have that hero and we identify with him. And then they have this goal, and the story is driven by the goal. The reason why we watch stories is because we want to know what happens next. And the thing that causes us to go, what happens next, is the hero has some kind of goal, something they're after that actually becomes very obsessive and extreme at times, right? And like I say, it could be something like, Braveheart. It's, I want to get the King of England out of Scotland. That's a strong goal. We all relate. Tyrant. He's a tyrant. We want to get him out, right? Or, Luke Skywalker, like I said, in a way, he wants to get off the planet. But then, of course, when things start changing and he becomes drawn in, he has to find out his identity and who he really is, because they're after him, right? So you have this strong goal that you're seeking after. And then there's always some, allies that they meet along the way, just like we do in life. And you could see, if you look at this, you see this is the journey of life for each of us. But here's the thing. In the beginning of the story, the hero has a flaw, what I would call there's an inner conflict and an outer conflict, right? The outer conflict is the villain, right? Darth Vader, he's taking over for the emperor, right? He wants to conquer the world, type of thing. So that's, and the more realistic the villain, the better the story. If you got a goofy, extreme villain, to be honest with you, James Bond villains and stuff, sometimes they're just not as interesting because they're just so cartoony, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, in that mythical level, the Darth Vader works very well. But so that's the external conflict. And then there's an internal conflict in that hero. And what it is they want something really badly, but there's something inside of them keeping them from getting it. You can call it the flaw, or, the inner flaw, the inner conflict. And that is really what this whole journey is about, And, I think that one of aspects of Luke is he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't have meaning and purpose. And he's seeking to find that. But until he understands who he really is, he's not going to be able to achieve that. And he's also got a smaller minded mentality about what he can do for the world. So, but the flaw is very important, because that is the thing that causes problems inside the psyche of the hero. And so the middle of the movie, or the story, I refer to movies because I'm a screenwriter, right, and also novels, but not my novels follow screenwriting storytelling technique, because I think it's the best storytelling anyway. Mm-hmm. So they, then the middle of the story is that hero pursuing their goal, but there's obstacles. The villain promotes obstacles, but there's also there's also obstacles created by the character's internal flaws. If you're bad, maybe you can't find, if a character can't find love, and it's because they're cruel, or they're a person who's unkind, whatever it is, there's inner flaws that are keeping them. And I think in a way, maybe you could argue, Luke's youth is part of a flaw. His youth, he doesn't understand. He doesn't have a strong sense of the bigger purpose in life and what's going on out in the world. He's very self-centered in that sense. There's different ways you can see that for Luke. He's a very, sort of a broad character. And a lot of times stories will have more distinct character flaws and distinct issues. But the point is that flaw inside the character is ultimately the thing that's going to stop the protagonist or the hero from achieving their goal, what they want. So the whole story is about them going after this goal. Sports movies, they're about achieving the goal of winning the Olympics, right? And then ultimately some things change in terms of that goal. I mean, ultimately Luke's going to have to save the universe, right? But he doesn't. His small-mindedness doesn't allow him to think in those terms until he has his own inner awareness. So you keep getting blocked from the goal, and that's what's interesting in the story. Whether you're reading a book or watching a movie, it's like keeps trying to accomplish and then keeps getting obstacles put in the way until finally it gets to the point near the end of the story where the hero looks like they're going to completely fail. A lot of times they face death, right? Or they face a moment of death. Someone close to them dies. There's a death that occurs that forces them to realize that it opens their eyes to understanding what is that internal flaw. And when they realize that, they then get the personal self-revelation the enlightenment that they need to overcome their external foe. So when you realize what your internal flaw is, you then can change, and you have the power now to overcome the external foe. And so, I guess I haven't thought much about Star Wars in a long time, so I'm trying to forgive me. I'm trying to recount some of the details. I could probably go through some other movies that are more familiar to me, but so Luke, when he
has Obi-Wan
realized
Kenobi's death, that's right. That moment.
Which, by the way, I forgot to mention that Obi-Wan Kenobi, as well as Chewbacca and Han Solo, those are obviously his allies that are helping him. But ultimately, he needs to realize and understand the power that he has within him. And Obi-Wan is the one that helps him realize that, and technically, Luke has always said that, that moment of dark despair facing death was when he's in the garbage compactor and it looks like there's no way out, But also I think that when he starts to realize that he has who he is and what he has, that he can learn to let go and let the force, guide him. He's been trying to control his life, trying to control, to get what he wants in life. But when he needs to learn how to let go and let the greater power, the force, take over. And when he has that revelation is when he begins to have the victory. And then that's what allows him to blow up the Death Star. Right. So you've got but think about it, that in a way that's sort of the hero's journey. And then the final battle at the end is that battle between the villain and the hero, where the villain's vanquished because the hero has overcome their internal flaws. And by the way, this isn't just with Star Wars and fantasy. It's with all hero stories. Right. But my argument is that journey is the storied version of conversion. That is how all of us converted. Now, it could be Christian conversion. It could be humanistic conversion, whatever. But the idea is that's the story of how we change. And that's why I think it's very primal. And, but it's also dealing, because it's a hero's journey, it's a singular focus. It tends to be also about bigger purposes and meanings, not, and so oftentimes, you have, oftentimes the hero has to actually give up the thing they're going after in order to achieve the greater good, which is the inner enlightenment. So, for example, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the second one, I think it was, the Holy Grail one, he's going after the Grail. That's his obsessive goal, that's, oh, wow, isn't it interesting? And then when he finally gets it, he's forced to make a choice. Am I going to save my father? Am I going to get rid of the Grail? Well, he gives up the thing he was seeking after because people are more important. He learns that, see what I'm saying? So you have this sort of spiritual revelation by giving up the thing you were seeking after, because what you need is not always what you want. And that isn't that conversion, as a Christian, I can say that's the story of my life, where I was seeking after meaning, purpose. But I didn't know God, and there is no meaning and purpose in life without God. All I kept facing was death. I was realizing, so what if I was a great artist? Michelangelo is a great artist, but he's dead. He's long dead. And we still study his works, but never give another 1,000 years and he'll be forgotten too. And, it's just like, we're all forgotten. We all face death. Fame is fleeting. All these things, like the book of Ecclesiastes. I went through that personal journey myself as I was seeking, because I kind of always wanted to find meaning and purpose because I felt empty, but it just ended up kept ending in death, in the sense of that's what I had to look forward to. And that forced me to realize, well, if I'm going to be dead a lot longer than I'm alive, shouldn't I really look into this afterlife thing? What's going to, whatever. I didn't know, is there a God or is there not? But shouldn't I look into that if I'm going to be dead longer than I'm alive, just to find out if there is something about the afterlife or not, right? And that's the thing that caused me to start looking into that. And when I did so, I learned that, the reason, the flaw that I had, like, well, where's God? I don't see God. I don't feel God. If there's a God, how come I don't have a sense of him? And, all that kind of stuff. And when I realized, the reason why I don't is because I'm separated from him. I learned that inner flaw was I'm cut off from my creator because of my sin, my sinful nature. And my sin blinds me and separates me from him. But through Jesus Christ's death on the cross, that enables me to reconnect with my God, my creator, under the condition of repentance and belief. And so when I did that, I came back into a relationship with my Creator, and I found the meaning and purpose that had eluded me my whole life. So that's my story of conversion as a Christian. And like I say, a humanist could give or an atheist can say, well, I was a religious Christian. That was my flaw because it was, but of course you have to tell us to us believably, and we'll see if it rings true. And my argument is that it wouldn't be, because ultimately the redemption comes in giving up transcendence and realizing there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no morality, but nonetheless we fool ourselves and act like there is. So I could argue that that's fallacious, but nevertheless an atheist used the same paradigm of redemption, because that's what this is. The hero's journey is about his redemption, and his redemption from that inner flaw is ultimately what it's all about.
Think about some of the stories that we love so much. Anakin Skywalker, he falls to the dark side and becomes Darth Vader, but the love of his son Luke brings him back to the light, resulting in his redemption. Same thing happens with Ben Solo, returning from the dark side, turning his back on his identity as Kylo Ren. Even Tony Stark's hero's journey is easy to follow as he goes from that wild playboy who doesn't care about anything but making money by selling weapons to anyone who wants them, to becoming a redeemed Iron Man who sacrifices himself to save the universe. Here's what I want to leave you with from this interview. The story of redemption is written on our souls. I want to thank Brian for joining me this week. There is so much more in my interview with him, so we're going to carry it over into next week's show. In the meantime, please check out Godawa.com, where you can learn about his books and everything else he's got going on. I promise his fiction writing is some of the best supernatural fiction you'll ever read. And thank you so much for listening to Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. If you enjoyed this interview, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your podcast app of choice. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on your app so you get every episode the moment it drops. Our next episode is going to release on Tuesday. It's going to feel like deja vu in a little bit. We're going to be reacting to all that crazy stuff that happened in Chapter 2 of The Mandalorian, and really breaking down some Easter eggs that you may not even understand from that. We'll be finishing our conversation about Season 4 of Cobra Kai, and then previewing Season 2 of Superman and Lois, since last episode, BB Nate just wanted to talk about Season 1. Anyway, make sure you follow Tatooine Sons on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Share this episode with somebody else out there. It's the way that you help the show grow. Thank you for doing that. That's going to do it for this week. There's only one thing left to say.
May the Force be with you always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Joy, please.
Yep, yep.